Hi everyone, my name is Gemma Staite. I'm the Threat Analytics EMEA team lead at BioCatch. I'm really excited to talk through a war story with you today, and I will be covering when cyber criminals misbehave, looking at behavioural 3D secure SCA. So let's take a look at the 3DS SCA Battleground. We've got the team good guys and the team bad guys. The European Banking Authority introduced the PSD2 regulation in 2019, which required banks to complete strong customer authentication for transactions over the exemption amount. So this means that banks had to have two factors of authentication, a possession factor, something like a one-time password, a knowledge factor, which is something you know, which is a password, and then an inherence factor. So this is something you are, biometrics or behavioural biometrics, and this is where BioCatch supports with the inherence factor. So the good guys consist of the banks and their fraud teams. So they're looking to comply with regulation, but also protect their customers from fraud. And then we have fraud and authentication solution providers, such as BioCatch, that work with banks and their fraud teams to provide them with the tools that they need to protect their customers. Then we have the bad guys, so the cyber criminals. And the cyber criminals have evolved significantly in the last 15 years since consumers have been able to transact online. With the additional controls that have been introduced as a result of increase in fraud rates, the fraudsters have had to evolve significantly with their tactics of aligning far more like online banking with complex and evolved techniques such as phishing, which is a form of social engineering, and also SIM swaps. So preparing to attack, the cyber criminal A will breach the website and harvest personal data and card details. And cyber criminal B will buy those harvested credentials via the dark web. And in this case, a real life example of one of our customers, a cyber criminal has done that and then used that information to log into a money transfer site and execute a payment for £1,600 using the victim's card details. So let's look at the attack a little bit further. So the cyber criminal has had to, as part of the PSD2 SCA regulation, complete the two factors of authentication to approve that payment and to get it to go through. And to do this, they have made a phone call to the victim, purporting to be from their bank regarding a fraudulent transaction. And the fraudster will tell the victim that they need the one-time password to cancel the transaction, when in actual fact they'll be authorizing the transaction. And at this point, the bank will send a one-time password to the victim's phone to authenticate the payment. This is essentially completing the possession factor of the authentication. And the victim gives the one-time password to the cyber criminal over the phone. And this is what we call phishing or social engineering. Now we focus on the defense. So the cyber criminal enters the one-time password and the postcode from the data that they've obtained from the dark web and the victim into the 3D secure page. And at this point, this is where the fraud fighters step in. Banks add a layer of behaviour on how the cyber criminal enters the one-time password and postcode, using things such as keystroke dynamics, long-term memory analysis, device and network. And these behavioural biometric analysis essentially ticks the box for inherence factor. And by doing that, it's transparent to the user, and it's also shown not to increase abandonment rates or complaints. The behaviour around postcode has proven to be the differentiator in the fight against fraud. At this point, the bank receives a high risk score and the transaction is declined. And this actually stops the cyber criminal in their tracks at this point. Looking at behaviour now. So what we have here is a video reconstruction of how the cyber criminal is interacting with the 3D secure page. Here we'll focus on how they've entered the information into the one-time password and postcode fields. So what you can see here is they're entering the postcode They're entering the postcode before the one-time password. They make a mistake and then they go and re-enter it. There's a bit of time here where they're waiting and then they enter the one-time password. And what we'll do now is focus on how is that information being entered in more detail, and how were we able to detect this as fraud. So behavioural biometrics on the long-term memory field is a differentiator. Here what we do is focus on how is the user entering the postcode to look for short-term versus long-term memory. If you are a genuine card holder and you know your information, you will be retrieving that personal information from your long-term memory. Compared to a cyber criminal who will have to use the spreadsheet or the data that they've obtained from the dark web as their reference point. And at that point, they are using their short-term memory or they're pasting information from that reference point. So what you can see here is a visualization of how the card holder is entering information into the postcode field or the one-time password field. And the axis along the bottom is your time in milliseconds. So from the time that they click into a field, you can see the blue dots that represents them entering information into that field. So if we focus on the postcode entry of the genuine card holder, what you can see here is that they enter the information in less than 2 seconds. So they're quick to enter the information, and looking at the typing pattern here, you can see it's quite fluid. If we compare that to the cyber criminal, what you can see is that it takes them around 8 seconds to start entering the information. And this is because the cyber criminal is using that reference point, the data sheet that they've got from the dark web. So they go to that sheet, they memorize a couple of characters, they come back to the challenge page, they enter that and then return back to their reference point. So you can see them entering it in groups of 2, and this is what we call segmented typing. And the orange dot represents the mistake that they made. So in entering the third group of 2 characters, they made a mistake, and you can see that there was some hesitation between the 5th and 6th character. And then they return back to their reference point and then come back and then enter the final character. And this is indicative of somebody using their short-term memory. They're not retrieving that information from their long-term memory, which is what we see in the genuine card holder's behaviour. Then we look at the one-time password, and we look for indications of phishing. On the left-hand side, you can see the genuine card holder and how the genuine card holder inputs the one-time password. And so you can see that they start entering this after 5 seconds in a group of 3, and then they return back to their phone. So they would have received the one-time password to their mobile, and then they are returning back to that to memorize the final 3 digits. They complete that all within 8 seconds. If we look at how the cyber criminals entered the information, you can see that they don't start typing for almost 33 seconds. And when they do start typing, the pattern is distinctly different. At this point, they're not using a reference point. And the one-time password is obviously something that's not supposed to be in your long-term memory. It's not personal information. You're looking at the device on which you've received it. And you can see here that the pattern is very different, and it's very indicative of somebody having a one-time password dictated to them. The flow is more fluid, and it's information that's being relayed 1 digit or 1 character at a time. So let's wrap this up then. So behavior works, and the long-term memory field has proven highly effective at detecting more fraud. It's detecting unique fraud that wouldn't have been detected with one-time password alone. And it's being used by multiple banks now, and it's being used successfully without having an impact on abandonment rates, and it's not affecting user experience or driving any complaints. Fraud will evolve over time as fraudsters adapt to the additional controls that have been brought in as a result of the PSD2 SCA regulation. And as they do so, we will work with banks to evolve with them. And we believe that behaviour is going to be key in supporting those banks and mitigating fraud. I hope you found that helpful. If you'd like to connect with me, my details are here. Feel free to reach out, and thank you.